No one thought it would end like this, not that quickly, not in a city like New York, because in the summer of 1929, everything looked perfect, and that was the problem. Picture the streets of Manhattan on a warm morning in June. Taxicabs everywhere, horns blaring, men in sharp suits moving like they owned the pavement, women in silk dresses walking like the world owed them. The shops were full, the restaurants were packed, the jazz clubs ran until 4 in the morning. You could feel it in the air, in the way people walked, in the way they ordered another round without checking the price. Life had never felt this good. But if you stopped for a second, if you really looked, you could see it. Small cracks. Nothing obvious, nothing that would stop you in the street. But they were there. The city had a story it told about itself, that it was unstoppable, that the old rules didn't apply anymore, that history was done with its wars and its suffering, and now, finally, it was your turn. The 20s had changed everything, not just for the wealthy, but for the barber and the secretary and the factory worker and the man who shined shoes on the corner of Wall Street every morning. Wages were up, jobs were everywhere, new inventions were changing everyday life faster than people could keep up with. If you lived there, it didn't feel temporary, it felt permanent, like this was just how the world worked now. And when people believe something that completely, they stop asking questions. The stock market was the heartbeat of the dream, numbers going up and up and up. Every week, every month, every year, people talked about it at dinner, taxi drivers gave tips, housewives tracked their portfolios before the coffee had even cooled. It had become more than investing, it had become a religion. A man named Edgar Brown invested his entire life savings, not because he understood what he was buying, but because his neighbor had doubled his money in 6 months. Why wouldn't he? Between 1924 and 1929, the market had nearly tripled in value. People who had never owned a single share were borrowing money to buy more. School teachers, shoe salesmen, retired couples living off modest pensions. Everyone wanted in, but something didn't add up, not really. And the strange part was, if you asked anyone in the city that summer, they would have told you everything was fine. Here's what the city wasn't telling you. Banks were lending money they didn't really have. Ordinary people were buying stocks on margin, putting down a fraction of the price and borrowing the rest. Some people were putting down as little as 10 cents on the dollar. You put in 10, you borrow 90, and as long as the market goes up, you look like a genius. But if it drops, even slightly, the whole thing collapses. Meanwhile, things nobody wanted to look at were piling up quietly in the background. The farmers who fed the nation had been going broke for years. Consumer debt was rising, and some of the companies whose stocks were soaring had barely turned a profit. A few economists tried to say something, carefully, quietly. They were ignored. Because who wants to stand up in the middle of the music and say, something isn't right? You lose friends that way. So people stayed quiet, and the cracks stayed small, for now. The summer of 1929 felt perfect. June, July, August. The market hit record highs. A man named John Raskob wrote an article for a popular magazine. He said if you invested just $15 a month in 20 years, you'd be a millionaire. Everybody ought to be rich. That was the title. People cut it out, kept it in their pockets. It felt like permission. September came, and something shifted. Barely noticeable at first. A slight wobble, a few bad days. Nothing to worry about. Markets always fluctuate. Everyone said so. But underneath the surface, the people who knew things had already started selling. Quietly, carefully. No announcements. No warnings. They didn't panic. They didn't shout. They just stopped believing. And when the people who know the most stop believing first, everyone else is standing in the room alone, still clapping, wondering why it got so quiet. By October, the market wasn't rising anymore. It was being held up, propped up by borrowed money and borrowed confidence, and everyone could feel it, even if they couldn't explain it. And then came October the 24th, a Thursday morning. Coffee carts on the corners. Men in hats walking fast, just another morning, and then the market opened. And it didn't stop falling. Panic selling, phones ringing, numbers vanishing in real time, men standing in trading rooms, faces going grey, mouths unable to form words. Outside on Broad Street, crowds gathered, hundreds of people, just standing there, staring, needing to see with their own eyes whether what they were hearing was real. The most powerful bankers in America pooled their money and tried to hold it together. It worked for a few days, and then it stopped being a story about money. It became something people couldn't control anymore. Black Tuesday, October the 29th. 13 million shares sold in a single day. Fortunes built over years, gone in hours. The barber's savings, the housewife's portfolio, Edgar Brown's life savings, gone. When people found out how much they'd lost, some of them just sat down, right there on the curb, on the office floor, and couldn't move. Because what hit people wasn't just the money, it was the realization, the feeling of looking back at everything you believed, everything that seemed so solid, so certain, and understanding it had been fragile the whole time. The city didn't go silent all at once. New York is too stubborn for that. The cabs still ran, the lights still burned, but something had left the air, that electricity, that feeling that anything was possible, gone. The Great Depression that followed wouldn't arrive overnight. The breadlines, the bank failures, the unemployment, that would take years. But something had already changed forever. The 20th century had just learned that progress isn't a straight line, that confidence isn't the same as security, that a rising number on a board is not the same as something real. The buildings were still there. The streets were still there. Same skyline, different sky. And somewhere in that crowd were the ordinary people, the ones who hadn't caused any of this, the ones who had simply looked at a world that seemed to be working and decided to trust it. They weren't reckless. They weren't naive. They were human. And the frightening part is, it never feels obvious when you're inside it. It never feels like a bubble when you're living in one. It just feels like the world. And that's what makes this dangerous. Because it means we would do it all again,